Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new study through a brand new book of the Bible. This is a study of the book of Psalms. Now, this is not our first study. If you've been with us for a while, you'll know that we're studying through every single chapter of the Bible, one chapter a day, and we've made it a long ways. Now, we have been studying Genesis through Second Chronicles, and after Second Chronicles is what? Ezra, right? Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Ezra. And so why aren't we going to Ezra and why are we going to Psalms? Well, a couple reasons. First is a chronological reason. So the Psalms, many of them were written like during the time of King David. And so although they don't appear until the middle of the Old Testament, many of them are actually written about and related to events that happened during the life of King David, which was around, 1100, 1000 BC or something like that. And so that's why we're going here next. The second reason is because I think maybe some people are ready to have a little bit of a change of subject after we've talked about all the kings of Israel and all the evil of Israel and Judah and the failure of the nations to follow God's laws, and maybe a change in subject matter would be welcome, at least for a little while. And so I thought we could tackle the book of Psalms. Also, it's now or never. There's 150 chapters in Psalm, so I figured you got to start at some point and get this massive book done. It's a really interesting book, 150 chapters containing poetic writings from the people of Israel. There's all different kinds of subject matters and themes, some psalms of praise, some psalms where the writer is expressing distress or his need for God or repentance. And so there's a lot going on here. We're going to take it chapter by chapter, starting today in chapter 1. We try to do these studies every day in 5 minutes, which is why it's called the 5-minute Bible study. The first study is always a little bit long because there's all this introduction information here. But just so you know, if you're new, we do a study every day and we create a PDF like the one that you're seeing on the screen that contains all the information that we're going over. And you can actually download these for free if you want them on our website. They're available every day at tobelikechrist.com as long as I actually update my website. And there's a link down in the description. Eventually, we'll have them printed in a physical book, which will be available on Amazon. Some of those books are available for purchase right now. You can check which ones are available down there's another link down in the description to Amazon. Now, the outline for this chapter is somewhat of a sad point for me. I spent hours putting together a color scheme that I really, really liked. And then I realized that this was going to be like a 310 page book. And I did the calculation on the printing costs and what it would actually cost to sell this thing and what the buyer would have to pay. And if I print it in color, and I have to print it in like a premium color because of the way that it's designed, it was going to end up costing like $45. And that was without like any profit on my end. That was just the cost to actually make the thing. And so I realized, well, I'm probably not going to be able to do that. I don't want to sell a study book for $50. And so what I'll have to do is I have to make it black and white. And so the outline is black and white. It makes me slightly sad. But just know that it's done that way for availability. And so people on the back end, people who want to study in the future, use this book for personal study or group Bible studies or whatever, can actually afford the thing rather than paying $50 for it. Now let's go ahead and get into our outline. I know that there's a lot of introduction that I could do to the book of Psalms, but I think we'll pick up a lot of that information as we go through each individual psalm and as we go through our outline. So just know that this is a poetic book. It contains many songs of the Israelites, and again, many poetic writings, 150 poetic writings of the people of Israel, written by a number of different people. We'll talk about authors as part of our outline in every chapter. If you've been with us for our last several studies, you'll know that the outline has been relatively the same. We always have our map section. We always have our, when these events happen section, timeline of the Bible kind of stuff. This outline is going to change because the subject matter is so much different in Psalms than it is in, say, 2 Kings. In 2 Kings, it's more of a narrative, a telling of history. In Psalms, it's, as I mentioned, poetic. And so the first page is going to change quite a bit. Our second page is pretty much going to remain the same with our outline and our application. So the first question that I want to answer in every psalm is, who's the author? Now, sometimes this is known, sometimes it's stated. Other times, it's not known. Sometimes people have a guess, other times it's just anonymous. And so you'll see that there are several authors. David wrote many dozens of the Psalms. There's another guy named Asaph. There's other individuals who write Psalms. And so first section, who is the author of this Psalm? Now this Psalm in Psalm 1, it's not actually specified, but most people ascribe it to David. That's King David, who was the second king of Israel and Judah. He's the guy who killed Goliath. He's the guy who sinned with Bathsheba. He's the guy who was a great warrior, but he was also a great psalmist. He was a great musician and a great poet, which is an incredible combination of character attributes. Our second section is going to be New Testament references back to this psalm. So interestingly, the book of Psalms is the most cited, most quoted, most referenced Old Testament book in the New Testament. And so to the best of my ability, I'm going to try to document where each psalm is referenced in the New Testament. That way, when you're studying the New Testament, you can come back. And also, you might want to, in your personal study, skip ahead and jump over to the New Testament and to connect the dots and connect the ideas that are in the psalm that we study that particular day to what's going on in the New Testament if you're familiar with the New Testament. There are definitely going to be, like today, days where there aren't any known references to this particular psalm in the New Testament. So none for Psalm 1. We have some for Psalm 2, though. We'll wait for those tomorrow. Then we're going to go down to another new section, and that's the theme section. What are just kind of the key ideas in this particular psalm? So for today, we've got 3 lines here. First, the counsel of wickedness versus the wisdom of God's law. Sin offers a person nothing but instability and ultimately a life of fruitlessness, ultimately a life that will be judged by God. The practice of God's laws and the meditation of an individual on God's laws gives a person stability, meaning to their life, and ultimately security with the Creator. The definition section down below is a throwback to our Leviticus study. The definition section will appear on the days when it's needed, but not every day. It's just to bring some clarity to some of the terms, maybe some of the concepts that are in the psalm that maybe are a little bit more difficult or something that we don't use as much in the modern day. So I've got 2 for clarification today. The first one is the definition of a scoffer. I don't think we use that term too much. A scoffer is someone who mocks or talks about an idea or a person as if they believe that that person is foolish or that idea is stupid. And then we have chaff. If you're a farmer, you probably know what this is. Maybe not if you live in the city. Chaff is the useless part of a harvested plant. So it's like the leaves or the debris that surrounds the seed, the crop that you actually want. The seed is kept, but the chaff is either thrown away or a lot of times is burned. So when you think chaff, just think useless, something you want to get rid of. All right, now that takes us to page number 2 into our outline section. This is going to look familiar. There is a little bit of a difference, though, in the way that I have to do the outline. There will definitely be a little bit more interpretation to my outline section than there has been in the past, because when you're just recounting historical events, it's pretty easy just to kind of state the facts. But in Psalm, where you have this more poetic language, I'll have to introduce a little bit more interpretation. So hopefully my interpretation is faithful to the text. I pray that it is. But just know that the outline section is going to be a little bit different. So for our chapter, we've only got one section. That's verses 1 through 6, the way of the righteous versus the way of the wicked. So the psalm begins by talking about a man who's going to be blessed. A man who's going to be blessed is a man who's going to refuse to take advice from wicked people. He's going to refuse to frequent the places that sinners frequent. And he's going to refuse to keep company with those scoffers, those who mock God and who mock other men. So that's what the man is going to avoid. But what is he actually going to fill his mind with? What is he actually going to do and practice? Having avoided these things, a man was going to be blessed if he meditates on the laws of God, if he fills his mind with God's teachings and God's precepts. Verse 2 says that he delights in the laws of the Lord. He doesn't delight in sin. He doesn't delight in doing the things that the world is doing, that sinful people are doing. He delights in what God tells him. He delights in practicing the ways of God. A man who meditates on and practices God's laws is compared to a tree that's planted by a stream of water. A tree that's by water is healthy, it's prosperous, it has what it needs to be strong and secure. And like a healthy tree that produces fruit, this man's life is healthy and it bears fruit. It has meaning and it brings forth good works. In contrast to that, the wicked are like that chaff that we defined in our on our first page, that the wind blows away. Their life terminates in meaninglessness, in uselessness. Wickedness leads to uselessness. Useless works that don't do good for anybody. And the psalm concludes basically by stating that God is going to judge those who walk in the ways of wickedness, but God recognizes, He knows those who are trying to do what is right and who are trying to walk according to His law, and He's going to preserve them and keep them secure. And so that's our outline for Psalm chapter 1. It's just a very short 6-verse chapter, and one thing that you'll find is that the Psalms are kind of all over the place. There's some that are like 6 verses, there's some that are like 20, then there's Psalm 119. We'll get to that later. So now that we finished our outline, we always have an application section. And this is important because we've read the text, sure, we've filled our head with knowledge, we've filled our head with some information about God's word, His laws, perhaps His instructions. What do we do with it? How do we apply it into our own life? So that's what we're doing here. Now, today's application is about meditation, which I think is fitting because we are, Lord willing, about to meditate on the Psalms for about 150 days. What is meditation? How do you do it properly? How do you do it according to the way that God talks about meditation versus the way that the world talks about it? Interestingly, meditation has really picked up as a trend. It's become much more popular in the last couple years. Much of it is kind of godless meditation. I think it's a way, honestly, for people to feel spiritual without having to recognize the true God and what He expects of us. And if you listen to many people who teach about meditation, they have different ideas on it. What should your mind be focused on when you're meditating? Some people will say that it should be empty. You should try to empty your mind. Some people say that you should focus on your breath. Some people say that you should just be present in the moment, observing the thoughts that come in and out of your mind like clouds passing by. But I think one thing to recognize is that ultimately that doesn't take you outside of yourself. Ultimately, that's self-centered meditation. It's not going to connect you to anything bigger. Now, if you're paying attention, you will have noticed that Psalm chapter 1 actually gives us a topic for our minds to be focused on as we're meditating, and that is the law of God, the instructions of God, the precept of God. And this makes sense because if we are focused on these things, this takes us outside of ourselves. It does connect us with something bigger, namely our Creator and the other human beings who God has put into the world. So we should meditate dwelling on God's instructions, asking questions as we do it like, why is this instruction so important to God? Or how does this command affect my relationship with the Creator and the other souls that He's created? Or asking a question like, how is God's precept better than what the world is offering? Meditating on God's laws connects us to something greater than ourselves. It ultimately makes us more like our Creator, more like Jesus, which should be the goal of all of us as human beings because we bear the image of God according to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. So thanks for joining me today for Psalm chapter 1. I know that it wasn't 5 minutes. Hopefully the next upcoming videos we will keep the time down, but you got to do the introduction information. So Psalm 1 today, Lord willing, Psalm 2 tomorrow, Lord willing in 150 days, Psalm 150.